Thanks for stopping by Big Top Gaming. My name's Brian, and in this video we're going to be talking about a list build strategy with Axell Florent, first of the Queen's Men in mind. So I've given quite a bit of love to Renly over the last few videos here, and I wanted to do something for the Stannis supporters. I originally wanted to do a list build discussion centered around Stannis, the one true king, but I have to make a lot of sacrifices in his list build exercise, and without actually being able to put those different options onto the table, I don't feel confident in presenting those as which one is the right decision or the wrong decision to make, or whether the decision is fluid and it's up to you and how you want to play. But when I started thumbing through some of the other commanders that are in the Hero Box 1 for the Baratheons, Axell Florent stood out to me as someone who punches just as hard as Stannis, the one true king, does, and makes it so I don't have to make a lot of the sacrifices that I was having issues with in a one true king build. In the Renly video, we had to, well, we didn't have to, but I chose to not talk about any of the loyalty units, especially the Rose Knights, which aren't released yet for him. And this discussion is going to be a little different because Axell Florent really relies on the R'hllor keyword, and we have some ways to get that out without the R'hllor faithful, but I would prefer to have them in this list, and I think the best way to discuss him is to have some of those base units in here, so we will be adding those to the list, and we'll get around to them a little bit later, but first let's dive into what Axell Florent brings for us. So the first thing is he's a Commander NCU, which is pretty huge when you've got things like the R'hllor faithful that are a little bit more on the pricey side, so you need to try and save some points somewhere. And for me, instead of going down to 2 NCUs in order to run a really big combat group, I decided to pick Axell Florent as the commander to make my decisions a little bit easier, because now my NCUs are going to be a little bit less of a points burden because he's free. So Axell Florent himself, when he claims a zone on the board, he doesn't have to exchange the tactics board ability for anything. He still gets to do his normal stuff, but he also gets to influence a unit. That unit loses a condition token, which can be pretty helpful, especially when you're looking at something like one of the ways to mitigate some of the Baratheon survivability is using vulnerable tokens. And he can just remove that. That's fine. It's not the biggest attraction of his NCU card, but when the unit that he influences also becomes a R'hllor unit, so we can add some options in here to get that keyword popping for his command cards. And we can also, I mean, if you have to, you can take some command or condition tokens off the R'hllor faithful, but for the most part, we're going to be trying to find non-faithful units to put in here as well, just so we can take full advantage of what Axell Florent's bringing as an NCU. So the first card in Axell's kit we'll talk about is Fiery Resolve. This triggers when a friendly unit passes a morale test. Then one enemy combat unit within short range of that friendly unit becomes panicked, and if that friendly unit was also a R'hllor unit, the enemy they panicked also becomes weakened. So first off, we've kind of got a strong panic-centered strategy with Axell Florent just off this one card, right? And we want to make sure that we're doing this with a R'hllor unit, because getting weakened out is going to be really helpful in making sure that we survive, because this unit is not very survivable at base, and some of the other ones we're going to be bringing aren't extremely survivable as well. So making sure that we take away some of our opponent's effectiveness by weakened tokens is going to be really important. The next card for Axell Florent is R'hllor's Wrath. This triggers when a friendly engaged combat unit makes a melee attack. The attack rolls +2 dice, and if it's a R'hllor unit, they also get Sundering. So this takes some of our units and makes them a lot more dangerous. So think of any unit out there that's not R'hllor, and giving them 2 extra dice and Sundering is going to help them out quite a bit. In the Renly video, we talked about how much more effective Baratheon Wardens can be if they get just the +1 attack die and Sundering from the Stormcrow Lieutenant. So this is a little bit better than that. It's only a card. You don't have to spend the points on it, but it will be helpful to get some extra damage across if you're trying to strike out with these guys early. The last card that Axell brings for us is Fiery Charge. and this triggers when a friendly combat unit successfully charges. The defender becomes panicked, and if you're a R'hllor unit that's charging, the defender also becomes vulnerable. So this is another way to just get more damage out there. We've got another card that adds panic tokens at base value, but then if you're R'hllor, you get another condition token out there, and this one will be vulnerable. So this card can help project a lot of damage. We're already looking at trying to do a lot of work through the morale test that we set on them, because we're going to have that panic token out there. But then we'll also have the vulnerable tokens if we're targeting a R'hllor unit, which most of the time in this list they should be R'hllor. And that's going to help push some damage forward too. So based on the kit that Axell Florent brings, we're seeing that there is a lot of damage buffing in here, a lot through panic tests, right? So that's kind of how we're going to center our builds. So the first thing I want to add to this is 2 of the R'hllor Faithful units. Now these guys are pricey. They're 7 points a unit, and I feel like as a side rant, they probably are more of a 6.5 point unit and just had to get ticked one way or the other. And I think 6 was too good and 7 is just not quite right for them. But they have some pretty cool abilities. They've got a really standard speed. I mean, not so much standard for Baratheon. I guess it's standard because the Wardens are the only ones that are speed 4. But they are speed 5. They hit on 3s, and they have, I think, pretty close to the same attack decay line as the Sentinels do. So they're quite aggressive, especially with throwing 8 dice on the onset. They have a 5+ armor save, which isn't super awesome, but they have a 4+ morale, so they're going to be able to stay on the table quite a bit longer because they're not going to be having so many problems with their morale. On their melee attacks, they have Vicious, so that's going to help us out a lot with Alistair's condition tokens, especially since 2 of his cards just base throw out Panic. We should be able to get a lot of Panic tokens out, and the Baratheons like having the missive zone, so we should be able to get quite a few more panic tokens out that way too. The other thing that these guys bring is a faith mechanic, and I have to mention kudos to the art designer or whoever did this, but the token image that's on the card for the R'hllor Faithful is not the same as it is for the Warrior's Sons or the Poor Fellows. This one has the little flaming heart on it, so it's really cool and thematic and immersive that their faith tokens would belong to their faith and not just, some base faith that's in the game. I'm really excited and happy to see that. But when we look at what their ability Heart of Fire does, whenever they pass a morale test, they end up getting a faith token, much like those other units do. But their first ability is, after this unit is attacked with melee, the attacker suffers a panic test with -1 to the roll for each one of the remaining ranks in this unit. So we've got another way to do panic tests outside of fighting or outside of the tactics board. With Vicious, these panic tokens, and then the Heart of Fire ability, we should be able to do quite a bit of damage through panic tests with this list. The next ability that they have is, when this unit is destroyed, one other R'hllor unit within long range can make 1 free attack action. It's very important to note that that's just an attack action. It doesn't specify whether it's melee or ranged, but it does need to be a R'hllor unit. So that's another reason why we've got to kind of have 2 of these guys and focus on taking the NCUs that are going to help us get more R'hllor keyword things out there. So again, 2 of those units, and I haven't put any attachments on them just because they are pretty expensive as they are, and I don't want to start clouding the list with attachments because it's going to take away from some of the business we can do with these guys. The R'hllor Faithful in general are a really interesting unit in that you kind of want them to die when you want them to die, but you still want to be healing them to get more effectiveness out of them while they have those tokens on them, because that forcing a panic test whenever you get attacked is a really big deal. It's like they have almost a better version of Lannister supremacy most of the time, especially if they are for whatever reason somehow able to stay on 3 ranks, which isn't going to be happening all that often, but still something to be hopeful for when you get around to putting these down the table. The next unit that I want to add to this is just one unit of naked Baratheon Wardens. They don't have any attachments in them, but the reason why I want a unit of Wardens in here is that the rest of the units in this list are going to be typically squishy, so I do want something in here that's going to hold a middle somewhere or hold some unit down that's a real big pain in the butt for these guys to deal with. It also can be a nice leading unit to act as a catcher's mitt for some of those aggressive units to allow your other more aggressive units to unpack into those. So these wardens can go towards scenario elements and just kind of hang out there and exist, or they can kind of get into the mix of it. And you can set up those good counter charges with things like the R'hllor Faithful. And then you'll be able to get some sweet business out of a lot of Axell Florent's commander cards. The next unit we're going to add to this is Stormcrow Archers, and they have the I forget the name of the ability, but it's the one where you can get an attachment for 1 point less. And the one that we were putting on them is a Stormcrow Lieutenant. And the big reason for adding Stormcrows is that we don't have... Oh, it's Adaptive, sorry, is the name of the ability. I just had to pick the card up. But the main reason we're adding these is the Baratheons in general just lack an overall shooting presence, and I don't think that a list needs to have something that shoots, but having something that shoots at long range can be quite beneficial. So these guys are going in not just for the low cost on them, but we get that Stormcrow Lieutenant to make them quite effective because the +1 die goes to their shooting as well, and Sundering applies to their shooting also. So they're going to be quite nasty when they start shooting, and they should be shooting a lot in this list because the R'hllor Faithful, as long as you have Axell Florent influencing this Stormcrow unit, when the R'hllor Faithful die, they'll be able to trigger these guys to shoot out of activation. And if you have the coin, you'll get that... you'll get the bonuses from the Stormcrow Lieutenant and be able to do quite a bit of damage out there. Another cool thing with these guys is that when you are just doing your normal activations, they could be non-normal activations, right? Because these guys can shoot out of activation 2 different ways, with taking the coin or the swords. You can shoot into combat with your R'hllor Faithful, and you'll have the panic test on the unit that you're shooting at, of course, as long as you're wounding them. But regardless of the wounds you do to the unit that you're shooting at, the R'hllor Faithful will still have to take a panic test, and that could get a faith token on them to de-incentivize your opponent from activating them, because they might not want to take that negative whatever panic test that you're going to be putting on them with one of those faith tokens, or they might be worried they'll kill the unit and just get shot again by the Stormcrow Archers. So these guys can machine gun down quite a bit of units that from our opponent's side if they're well placed and just influenced at the right time. The next unit that we're going to bring, and I believe this is the last combat unit we've put in here, is a unit of Bolton Cutthroats. So this is another unit that kind of functions as a R'hllor Faithful, kind of, sort of, in a weird way. We don't get the cool faith mechanic, but for 5 points, we end up getting another vicious unit that can weaken things back with their spiked mace ability, and we also are not... It's vulnerable, sorry. Vulnerable is what they do. I'm mixing them up with the Wardens. There's too many condition tokens floating around in this list for me to keep them all straight. But we get a vicious unit that's quite cheap, not super survivable, but we can make them R'hllor and trigger off a lot of their cool keywords. Or once we get that keyword on them, we can trigger a lot of the cards from Axell Florent. That'll make them do a lot more in combat because they have that vicious, and they'll be able to have the panic token on our opponent's unit so that we can make them fail more and do more damage. Like Axell Florent doesn't look like he does a whole lot up front, but with all these panic tokens that we're going to be putting out, we should be able to get quite a bit of damage across. The Bolton Cutthroats did get a flare added to them because I thought that with the low morale, I want to be able to fuel these guys back up and keep them in the fight a little bit longer. And with all the panic tests and the panic tokens and the vicious, I feel like this unit is probably the best one for the Flayer. I think the Flayer works pretty well on the R'hllor unit, or the R'hllor Faithful, but I just don't know if it's something that they need to have in order to keep going, because they have that good morale stat. But the House Bolton Cutthroats kind of need the Bolton Flayer's help, so we're adding that to this list for our last point in the combat group. So now we're going to move over to the rest of the NCUs that we're bringing here. And the first one that I've grabbed up is the dreaded Melisandre the Red Woman. Now, she's a 5-point NCU, so she's expensive, and if you don't want to run her in this list, you can change her to something else and get the points for more attachments or something, but I think she's really important to the way this list functions. Her and Axel are like peanut butter and jelly. Like, they go really well together. Even though I hate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, I never really enjoyed them so much. I like one or the other, but that's besides the point. Melisandre has an ability called Sacrifice to the Lord of Light. When Melisandre activates, so that's before she even gets put on the zone or that she's going for, or before you even choose the zone, just when she activates, you force one enemy unit to take a panic test. In addition to that, you can choose a friendly combat unit to suffer 1 to 3 wounds. For each wound they suffer, the enemy unit taking the panic test suffers -1 to the panic test and takes 1 to 3 wounds depending on whatever you took, right? If they were to happen to fail the test. So if you crown zap a unit, you tab one of your other friendly units, maybe your wardens are sitting there doing nothing, so you zap 3 wounds onto them. Your opponent's going to have -3 to this panic test, and they're going to have to take D3 plus 3 wounds. Or D3 plus 4, sorry. And that's a huge deal. Like, people in the early days really didn't appreciate Cersei crown bombing you at a -3, but now we can crown bomb you at a -3 outside of actually taking the crown. So if Melisandre happens to sweep a unit that's low, or if she doesn't quite get there, it means that we can still take the panic, or we can still take the crown zone to zap that unit again, or we can zap another one or go somewhere else if we want to. The ability to have such a strong power outside of claiming the zone is massive, and I think that Melisandre is worth every single point you pay for her. She's 5 points, and that's hot business, right? Like, we're looking at the Walder Freys and the Olenna Tyrells, but Melisandre, I feel like, has one of the best 5-point abilities, just based on not only how we're building this list, but just because of the raw damage that it can do. This is massive. We're talking about doing almost as many wounds, if not more, than what a normal combat unit would do for those 5 points, and then still getting to do more stuff on top of it. So Axell Florent and Melisandre are super great together, especially since you want to try and make this panic test fail so that you get all those extra wounds put on top of it. The next unit that we're going to grab is Selyse and Shireen, Shireen. So the reason we're grabbing these is because we do have 3 units in this list that are not R'hllor, and Axel can only do so much for us if we want to have R'hllor in every place possible. So Selyse and Shireen can influence a unit, and as you would suspect, they make that unit a R'hllor keyword. In addition to that, each time that unit attacks, after rolling the attack dice, it can suffer D3 wounds to deal the same amount of wounds to the defender. So if you've played against or play with Free Folk, we all know that Styr is a pretty big dread, enough to where they had to put him up to 4 points because he was just performing really, really well for the 3-point slot. So we've got Selyse and Shireen, who have a good ability on their influence for this list, and then on top of that, they get Styr's ability too. So we've got a really strong NCU here, and even more so because the tactics deck for the Baratheons can let you attack so many times outside of your normal activation. It is also worth noting that this doesn't specify between melee or range. So if we did put this on the Stormcrow archers that we're bringing along, we could get a potential 3d3 extra wounds with the R'hllor Faithful dying and triggering them to attack, then the coin triggering them to attack, and then the swords. Now, if your opponent gives you that glorious moment, then you should relish in it. I don't think many people are going to let that one go by, but it does at least, you should be at least getting like 2d3 extra damage out of these guys, and that means you're going to be triggering more panic tests, and that's always good for this list too, because that's one of the biggest benefits to getting just D3 wounds straight is that you are bypassing the armor. That's cool, but you're guaranteed to force a panic test on someone, and even with units that are a little bit stronger on the morale side, they might not want to take a panic test if they're a little bit lower on numbers, because it could just wipe them out really easy, whereas prior to the changes for panic, they could take a panic test whenever and feel pretty confident that if they failed, they would be fine because they don't lose that many. But Selyse and Shireen make it into this list. Now, I know we talked a lot about condition tokens and getting those out. I think you could make an argument to flip Selyse and Shireen for Shira Errol, but I think the R'hllor keyword is important enough for this list to have 2 instances of getting it out. Plus, that D3 extra wounds is a really big deal, especially considering the extra attacks we talked about. So I don't like having to swap those 2. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this list, and tell me how you've been building some of your other Stannis lists, especially the One True King, because that one's got me scratching my head. The sacrifice that I feel like you have to make there is, do you want 2 NCUs and a bunch of presence on the field with combat units, or do you want your 3 NCUs like the Baratheons, in my opinion, enjoy having, but then you're kind of only stuck with 4 combat units because those R'hllor Faithful, they get pricey enough to where your options for other units are quite limited. Even in this list, I'm only able to get the 2 attachments that I have in it because one of the units that I have are Stormcrow archers, and their adaptability ability, I guess, allows them to take a 1-point attachment for free. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and I look forward to making the next one. We should be getting around finally to that Howland Reed discussion, and we'll probably do some more painting tutorials in the future. I don't know. I have Tabletop Simulator downloaded on my computer, so I could try to film some battle reports on it, but I think I'm just not well versed enough with the going through the motions on Tabletop Simulator, where it's probably going to be a little painful to watch me go through those games. But I'll work on it and see what we can do to try and adapt to the situation that we happen to find ourselves in right now.